simple, fast step. It all starts with negative interest rates. So to get Donald's take on negative interest rates and the dollar, let's check out a press conference from the other day when he announced the China trade deal.
Bothers me when Germany and other countries are getting paid to borrow money. This is one. I don't know where that all leads, but we have to pay. We're the number one in the world by far, and we have to pay for our money. Our interest rates are set high by the Fed. Our dollar's very high, and relatively speaking. But when other countries get literally, they have negative rates, meaning they're under, they get paid. I love this. This concept is incredible. Again, you don't know where the hell it leads, but you borrow money, and when you have to pay it back, they pay you. This is one that I like very much. I really want to know who are the people that buy this stuff? Who puts money into something when they say this is a guaranteed loss? But that's a whole different group of people than I know.
Classic Trump. I love this stuff. It's an incredible concept. But again, you don't really know where the hell it leads. He's a bull in a china shop, but I've got to appreciate his honesty when he admits that the only person that would buy negative yielding debt is completely insane. Moving on to how he's going to collapse the dollar, or inadvertently collapse the dollar. It starts with his desire for negative interest rates. And to see how this plays out, we've got to understand that there's tremendous excess demand for treasuries and the United States dollar. The reason why is because there's negative interest rates in Europe and Japan. So all of that capital that's in Japan in sovereign wealth funds or financial institutions and in Europe is searching for a yield. The only place right now that they can find that yield is in the bond market. That's what's creating excess demand for treasuries. Now, how is that creating demand for dollars as well? To buy the treasuries, they have to take their local currency and exchange it in the FX market for dollars. So the Japanese take their yen, go into the market, they buy dollars with that yen. They take those dollars to buy treasuries. The Europeans do the exact same thing with the euro. So while this creates excess demand for treasuries, it also creates excess demand propping the dollar up higher than it otherwise would be. So in order to get those negative interest rates, the Fed is going to have to print a lot more money, do more quantitative easing, go into the bond market to buy more of those treasuries, creating even more artificial demand to drop those interest rates lower. You may be saying, yeah, George, but isn't the majority of the government debt short-term? So if the Fed has control over those short-term interest rates, they shouldn't have to worry about the rate on the 10-year Treasury. Well, we can just ask the repo market how much control the Fed actually has over those short-term rates. The bottom line is if the government wants to borrow at negative interest rates, the Fed is going to have to not only control the short end of the curve, but they're going to have to bring down the interest rate on the 10-year as well. Editor, let's throw up a chart of interest rates on the 10-year and the last few rounds of quantitative easing. Looking at the last 3 rounds of quantitative easing, you'll notice that interest rates on the 10-year Treasury actually went up. And ironically enough, when they stopped quantitative easing, interest rates continued back down. And what's interesting is when they did Operation Twist, interest rates actually did go down. Why is that? Because that was the only time that the Fed bought treasuries without expanding its balance sheet. So the moral of the story is every time the Fed starts expanding its balance sheet, interest rates on the 10-year Treasury have gone up, not down. And if expanding the balance sheet to over $4 trillion in the last 3 rounds of quantitative easing actually made interest rates go up, how much further is the Fed going to have to expand their balance sheet to get them down to 0, if not negative? 8 trillion, 12 trillion, $20 trillion, and that brings us to the dollar barometer. Once they get to that point where they've expanded it to 12, $20 trillion, that's when the dollar will most likely tank. Which brings us back to Europe and Japan. If they see the dollar tanking and interest rates going down close to the interest rates they have at home, they're not going to have any more motivation to buy those treasuries. So they're going to sell treasuries and they're going to sell the dollar. That means they're completely reversing course. So the interest rates on the treasuries go up, the dollar goes down. Well, the Fed can't have that because the government needs negative interest rates. They have to pick up all the supply that's being created by the Japanese and the Europeans selling their treasuries. In order to do that, what do? They have to print more dollars to buy those treasuries, which takes us back to the dollar barometer, where now it would be in plummet mode. Oh, but wait, there is more. While all this is going on, let's remember that insolvent Sam, and he could be your uncle, and his cousin Double D, Devalue Donald, are spending money like a drunken sailor. They are running up trillion-dollar plus deficits, which is creating an additional supply of treasuries, while the Fed is printing all of these dollars to create more demand for those treasuries. So if the Fed started by increasing their balance sheet up to 12, $20 trillion to get those interest rates down, then they'd have to print an additional 12 or $20 trillion to keep them there when all of the foreign demand heads for the hills. They'd have to print another $20 trillion to make up for all the additional supply that your insolvent drunk Uncle Sam and Double D is creating. And that takes us to the final step on the dollar barometer, which is collapse. Now is when your friend and family member Fred steps in and says, "Yeah, George, I get it, but you're just exaggerating. You're just one of those crazy free market libertarian guys. The United States is going to be the best economy forever, and the dollar will always be king." But your friend and family member Fred forgets that Double D has a plan B. And what is plan B? You may be asking yourself. Well, it's actually very simple. Instead of taking all of this funny money and injecting it into the bond market, the Fed could just take all that newly printed money and shoot it straight into the FX market selling dollars. That would create a massive excess supply in the foreign exchange markets, also collapsing the dollar. Basically, a Plaza Accord 2.0, which would be an intentional devaluation of the United States dollar. Negative interest rates and devaluing the dollar in the FX markets are both intentional. And I did say that Double D himself could inadvertently collapse the dollar. How would he do that? We've got to go back to the China trade deal, which of course, according to Trump, is the best trade deal in American history. That involves China buying more goods from the United States, mostly food and energy, which is great news because your food and energy costs will skyrocket. If China is taking more of their dollars that they have from their trade surplus with the United States and spending those on food and energy, that means they have fewer dollars to do what? Buy treasuries. That means additional supply of treasuries hitting the market, which means the Fed has to print more money to buy those treasuries. In other words, the dollar tanks, plummets, or collapses. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.